to the GAB Talks by the Independent Press Award. I'm your hostess, Gabby Olczak. Today, we will be speaking with CK Donnelly, author of Trine Fallacy, the Kinderra Saga Book 2, winner of the 2022 Independent Press Award in Epic Fantasy. Trine Rising, the Kinderra Saga Book 1, was the winner of the 2021 Independent Press Award and the 2020 New York City Big Book Award in Epic Fantasy. CK is an award-winning journalist and founder of Gabby Creative Media, a freelance writing and marketing support firm. A lifelong lover of fantasy stories, CK lives in Arizona with her husband and little black dog. Congratulations, Cindy, and welcome to the GAB.
Thank you so much.
So great to have you here. First, let's clear up a couple of things. On your books, we see CK, but naturally, I just welcomed you as Cindy. So tell us the little story behind that.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I was a journalist for many, many years. And so I had a lot of bylines under Cindy Gabby. Gabby is my married name. We don't have a lot of children in our extended family, so I really wanted that maiden name, that family name to continue and have a bit of a legacy. So that's how I came up with my pseudonym. C is for Cindy, K is for Gabby, my married name, and Donnelly is my maiden name. And so I wanted that to kind of exist as a legacy in perpetuity.
Well, I love it, and certainly fitting for an epic fantasy book. So let's go into something else a little interesting. I understand we're both Star Wars fangirls. So yay about that. Share with us what led you to young adult epic fantasy genre, and summarize a little bit for us the Trine sagas.
Sure. Well, first, briefly to summarize the saga, and is Mirana Pinals is 16 years old, and she's one of the few to ever have been born with all three powers of the aspects: that seeing, defense, and healing. So she's very rare. It's called a trine, as in three. But coupled with that, she's terrorized by horrible visions that if she wields her power, uses it, that she will destroy all that she holds dear. She just foresees this great, horrible cataclysm, and then everything goes blank. So she's terrified to use her powers. So she goes on a quest and picks up a mentor to try to understand what the keep tower is. This tower where she sees the powers being manifested and having all this destruction. And yet there's a dichotomy that white light coming from the tower is also very peaceful, very almost angelic like. And so she's like, none of this is making sense. So she goes on a quest to understand more about the tower and her own powers, her place within it. And all this is set against the backdrop of a war that's lasted millennia. And currently there is her antagonist, which is the Dark Trine, who we think is trying to become overlord of the whole land of Kinderra. So that kind of sums up the basic premise of the whole trilogy.
So you said your protagonist is a 16-year-old. So why the young adult epic fantasy genre? What inspired you to go to that genre specifically?
Sure. I actually kind of straddle both young adult and regular, or I hate when I say adult fantasy because it sounds like it's X-rated, but for those, I like to say it's 15 up or PG-15. Mirana and her love, Teague, are both 16-year-olds, but there's also two other points of view who the story is narrated by, and they are adults. They are in their 50s. So there's all these themes that, yes, young adults, because the protagonist is young and kind of going through that coming of age, and I don't know what I'm going to become, as well as adult point of views who are, am I past my shelf life? And, I want to know that all I've been going through and suffering through is going to have impact, and I'm going to leave the world a better place. So there's a whole range of things. A lot of times it just gets shelved as young adult because Mirana is young.
Because she is
straddles both.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned a lot of other characters, and an important theme in the novels is the relationship that Mirana has with the other characters. Tell us about that, and why is that important in the novels?
One of the things that I really wanted to do as I was creating all these stories is I wanted to take all those tropes that we know, the chosen one and the evil person and the love and all of that, love triangles, and I wanted to spin them 180 degrees. So I studied Joseph Campbell and Christopher Vogler, and I'm like, how can I take these things and make them very different? So you mentioned relationships. One of the very unique relationships that I have in these books is a love triangle, but it's actually a father, mentor, daughter love triangle. There is a lesser romantic love triangle, but this is very unique. Her father does certain things, and her parents do things to protect Mirana. And when she finds out, she goes ballistic, as just about anybody would, especially a teenager. And she basically says, I don't want to have anything to do with you ever again. And she really starts to glom onto her mentor, which is Tetrick Garris, who is the only other existing Trine, along with maybe the Dark Trine. So that is a unique relationship that, I'm turning my back on my parents and going forward with a mentor, and then how that all evolves.
So which character was the most challenging one for you to write, Cindy?
Honestly, it was Mirana herself.
Why so? Is it because she's a teenager, and we all know how complex teenagers can be?
No, well, to a certain degree, yes, but I was having a hard time really nailing down where her angst was coming from. I didn't want her to be essentially turning her back on her duty because she's a coward. I didn't want that to come through. I didn't want it to think that people are afraid she doesn't want to die, or she just doesn't want to, work that hard or whatever. So I really had to make a very strong conflict that she desperately wants to use her powers, but she's thinking that if I do, things will become even worse than they are now. So maybe I shouldn't. And then as she, evolves, she learns things and like, well, how can I move forward and do things safely? So that was difficult, to show her bravery within her hesitancy and her indecision. That was difficult.
So Trine Rising was your debut novel. I understand it took you 20 years to write it.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you've actually trademarked the term unsuccessful quitter. So yes. How does that relate to your 20-year span of writing Trine Rising?
I think it's almost self-explanatory.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Something for 20 years, you don't quit. It definitely, the unsuccessful quitter is definitely kind of my testimony, my writer's journey. I began with just some very basic seeds of this story within a fanfic novel that I wrote for Star Wars. So we talked about Star Wars and our love. And that was the first long form novel that I ever wrote. And there were some very good things, but basically it's a trunk novel. But there was a character in there that had a really compelling backstory, and that's what became the very foundation of the Kinderra Saga. I pulled that character and her backstory out, and I changed everything around from science fiction to become a pre-technological kind of, your high fantasy society. And that's how that began. So it just was a lot of writing, fits and starts. Maybe after I had written what I thought was a decent draft, I went for critique because I knew it wasn't published ready, and it got decimated. Wow. And it crippled me. I almost quit my journalist job because I thought I was that bad a writer. I mean, which says more about me than the critiquer, but it was crippling. And so that took a long time to overcome that. And when I was ready to face it again, that took like 14 years before I picked it up again. Wow. Now, within all of that, there was a lot of life, parents getting sick and dying and moving cross country and layoffs. And so there was a lot of that involved too. So I didn't really pick it up again until 2016. And that's when I really dug into it in earnest and took workshops. And I took one huge story and whacked it into 3, which ends up being the 3 novels, Kinderra, Trine Rising, Trine Fallacy, and soon to be released Trine Revelation. So that one long story became a trilogy. So, and then, you know, you go through all the harrowing things of trying to get an agent. And unfortunately, I never was able to get representation. So I had a big kind of earth-shattering moment. If you want these books to see the light of day, you have to self-publish. So then I thought about it, and there's so many positives about self-publishing, but it has its own inherent issues. And so that became, you know, several years of putting things together. So that's how unsuccessful quitter. You may want to quit, but you were just compelled by that fire in your belly, that passion, that perseverance, and that just keeps you going no matter what.
Well, that's great advice for aspiring authors, that don't give up just because you don't have an agent. There are certainly other avenues these days.
Right, right. And so many other authors that are established, like I believe even lately Brandon Sanderson has bought back rights or is doing something on his own aside from his publisher. So there is a trend of even represented authors wanting to have more creative control and buying back their rights or just issuing new books outside of their publisher. So we are not going away. We are only becoming stronger.
And that's, of course, wonderful for us to hear. So tell us about the process of designing your covers, which are really very intriguing as well.
Thank you so much. I wanted it to be eye-catching and different as any cover. And I know in the last couple of years, especially with YA, you have a lot of very kind of flowery things like a wreath, and then they'll have a crown and a skull, or a crown and a knife, and they all look very generic. And I didn't also want to do the 3/4, you know, pulled back camera shot. That's kind of no longer done, of the characters, you know, and taking a scene from the book. That's right. Really no longer done anymore. So what else could I do? So that's why I chose the amulets. And each amulet that is depicted on the cover is very central to the meaning of the book. To something important going on in the book. It's not just there for decoration. It is very central to the plot.
Now, did you design it yourself, or did you have a designer?
No. I write well. I know my way around Photoshop, but I can't draw. The first one was put together by a cover artist named Jennifer Givner out of Acapella Book Design. She did a phenomenal job. But in the process of working through that particular style about her, a lot of it was like clip art or stuff from a stock photo. And you can only manipulate it so much, and there's difference in the rights. So I knew as I did, you know, characters and other covers, I knew I wanted to have completely worldwide rights of my own, so you can merchandise, because you can't merchandise certain things. The covers, maybe you can, but other things. So with book 2, I went with an illustrator, Kim Dingwall, out of Australia, phenomenal artist. And so that way I had more legal rights over being able to use images for merchandising.
Well, the covers are terrific. So, I mean, how do you come up with this stuff? Honestly, it's a question I often wonder about with all of these types of books and movies. Where did you draw your inspiration for the Kinderra world, which is extremely complex, and the culture, the language? What inspired you?
There were several points of inspiration. Certainly Star Wars. I loved the idea that you had a realistic, gritty, you know, war struggle going on with characters that might be a little gray. But there was that element of fantasy, as we know, the Jedi Knights. And I loved magic. I mean, loved Lord of the Rings. Who didn't?
Yes.
I loved Pern, Dragon Rise of Pern with Anne McCaffrey, and the Dearney Chronicles with Catherine Kurtz. Those just really inspired me. So I kind of wanted that feeling that you have something that's quite realistic, yet you have magic. So that's kind of the pathos that I wanted to get across. And from there, then I created the toolbox. How does the magic work? What are my metaphysical rules, if you will? That was important. Before I ever wrote any sort of outline or anything, I had to understand deeply how the magic would work. And I didn't want magic to become a deus ex machina where you just blink, I dream a genie, and everything's solved. So there's a cost to using the magic. My people are more, normal human mortals with some special abilities than they are superheroes, because they can very well be killed, and they have normal human lifespans if they aren't killed on the battlefield. So that was important to bring that in. These are people that are pretty much just like us with, a few extra abilities. So it really began working through the mechanics of the world. Okay, so this is the magic. What does that mean? Does everybody have magic, or is it just a certain subset of people? So yes, I did the old Punnett square to figure out genetic passability and created the culture from that. There's 9 provinces, and just like in this country, different parts of the country have slightly different cultural norms, even though we're all one country, at least so far still. So, it was one step after the other. Geography played a huge, huge role in how everybody relates to each other, because, you have to travel and trade and all that. So it was really layer upon layer, but starting with the magic and the people.
Well, it really is a fascinating world. So you did mention Trine Revelation, book 3 of the Kinderra Saga. So when can we read it? When can we buy it? And what can you tell us about it without spoilers?
Sure. I literally 10 minutes before we went on, I think I finished my last uploads into KDP, Amazon, and Ingram.
Wow.
So it's coming, however long it takes for them to go through the file checks and creating the book block. So we're just days away from that being able to be launched and purchased. So I'm thrilled with that. This is, it's the end of the trilogy, but it's certainly not the end of the central saga with Mirana and her and what else she goes through. So it kind of completes this first opening salvo, if you will. All our questions get answered about, Mirana's powers and all the visions that she's had and what happens to the war and all of that.
That's always my favorite, when all your questions get answered. It's so satisfying.
Yes, absolutely. But I expect to do 8 or 9 books in the central series. So it is certainly not the end of Mirana as we know her.
Well, that was my next question. Is this the end of the Kinderra Saga? And what are you working on now?
No, absolutely not. At least I hope so. They are expensive to produce. so please, people, buy my book.
Well, and that brings me to my final comment, Cindy. How can listeners and readers find out more about you and the Trine Sagas?
Absolutely. You can, the most obvious place is to go to my website, ckdonnelly.com. And everything's there. You can click on there, and it has links to purchase the books from whatever bookseller you prefer, whether it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent. So they're all there. And I have about me pages there. I try to keep up with it. I'm very active on social media, so follow me on the big 3. Instagram is probably my primary one, Facebook. Lesser extent, Twitter. I'm starting to dabble with TikTok with some of my videos. So we're there. And my website, I try and, like I said, keep up with announcements and things. And so right now we're just, in the throes of getting book 3 out, and then we'll be doing some marketing around that. And hopefully, knock on wood, our next thing would probably be the audiobook for Trine Rising book 1. I can't wait to do that.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. Cindy, this was so fun. Looking forward to more from you. I love the world. It's fascinating. It's exciting. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Gabby Olczak of the GAB Talks. Next podcast, we will chat with author Ann Cates Sullivan. Until next time,